chatting with Cherie Harder of the Trinity Forum. We were talking about fundraising, and she's like, it's really easy to raise funds if you're outraged about some moral issue. And you're definitive about what it is you're wanting to do. But it's very hard to get funds if you're actually trying to have a healthy, nuanced conversation that will really move the needle.
Yes. Well, and that's the thing about the whole like the nice way doesn't work thing. I always want to say like I kind of want chapter and verse on that so I know what we're actually talking about. Um, because I'm sure that there are examples that people who say that could provide me that I would have some level of sympathy to. And yet, like when we followed the city code and followed liberal democratic norms, as we did here in Lincoln with the fairness ordinance, that worked. Um, I think part of what's hard is that when the lawful normal processes work, it's kind of boring. It's not going to trend on Twitter. It's not going to get a spot on the news. Um, it's not attention grabbing. And yet that doesn't mean that these things aren't working. It means that we have a kind of media environment where negative emotions and negative stories and extremism play much better than healthy, sane ways of going about things. Like even here, like sorry, Lincoln is what I know. I've lived here my whole life. Just two different stories that come to mind even as you were talking here in Lincoln. The group that organized that petition drive here in town actually has reasonably good relations with a lot of progressives. Now, the progressives can't always acknowledge that publicly because it would be bad for them politically, but they've worked very, very hard to build relationships with progressives in Nebraska politics. And that's anything from like knowing what's going on in their personal lives and caring and asking questions, sending them flowers when something they're going through something hard. Um, but it makes a difference in being able to actually accomplish things because you do have trust and a shared relationship with people, even if they find some of your views odious. Um, the other thing, a friend of mine has shared this story before. So there's a unicameral rep in Nebraska who's kind of a legend. If you Google him, you'll find stories named Ernie Chambers, first Black unicameral rep in the state's history. So he's from North Omaha, and he was in the unicameral for 40 some years. They created term limits for the unicameral specifically to get rid of him. And then he came back after he was gone for 4 years and he came back. And now he's been gone for 4 years again. And the dude is 86 years old and he's talking about running again. He's just a machine. But Chambers is a bomb thrower. Like he knows the rule book better than anyone else in the unicameral. He knows how to use it and he loves to make his point. And so you can talk to some conservatives who just hate the guy because he's this progressive atheist from Omaha that ties up all these things in the unicameral. But a friend of mine who had I think it was his father was in the unicameral years ago, and there was a contentious bill being discussed, and Ernie got up to speak, and everybody was kind of bracing themselves for the blow dryer. Ernie was going to get going, and he was going to filibuster, and we were going to be here for a while. But then at one point, as he was speaking, he said, "Actually, I'd be willing to yield the floor and hear what my colleague," and he said my friend's father's name, what he thinks about this, because I would like to hear his thoughts. And this guy was a conservative evangelical farmer from central Nebraska. But Ernie wanted to hear what he thought. And it was because this guy had always made a point of trying to be the best friend he could be to Senator Chambers. And Ernie respected him. And Ernie didn't respect a lot of people in the unicameral, but he respected this guy. Because this guy had done the work of building bridges with him. And you're not going to find a more like obstreperous, like can be very hard to work with rep than Ernie Chambers. And he was a phenomenal, like for his district, he was phenomenal. So I don't mean that as a criticism, but he knew the rule book and he could make your life really miserable if he wanted to because he knew the rule book. I've seen kindness and following norms and care and relationship. I've seen these things work. And so when people say nice doesn't work, I'm just like, I really wish you'd be more specific because it's possible that what you have in mind doesn't actually work. But also, that's not really what I mean when I'm talking about like trying to treat people with kindness and care and gentleness and all these things that Jesus calls us to. It's not what I mean when I talk about like submitting to the norms of liberal democratic self-governance. Because I've seen that work. I've seen it. I mean, our country's history is proof that this works, right? Like we've been doing this for over 200 years. So it does work. I think people lose faith in systems and processes and even sadly in Christian character when they feel anxious and frightened. But like that's a failure that we repent of and we learn to recognize in ourselves and we ask God to help us grow and strengthen us um rather than a kind of like guiding approach that should shape how we do public life.
Mm.